You know what? He's never too far behind. Let's see over here. Maybe he's outside right now. Oh, whoa. Yeah. Hey, no, it's okay. It's fine. The big question at the beginning of every single one of these seasons, like every year, is how am I going to do something with a monster people have seen a million times before? You know, what's the new angle? How does that new angle benefit story and character? What is the narrative and thematic purpose of selecting the monsters that I do? That's a process that takes a long time to figure out, you know, because in truth, having these public domain characters, more or less, is a blessing and a curse. They have some set rules, so you don't have to worry about creating something 100% new, which is, I'm sure, an anxiety of many new and up-and-coming creators. But also it has to have a purpose. So, you know, when it comes to Slenderman, the Rake, and Seed Eater, I guess, and Lines, in my case, you know, what's the purpose, and how did I do a lot of it? So, I guess I should, like, start off with the most familiar one, you know, the man himself.
Okay. There he is.
Slenderman is different every year I work on him, and I wanted to make that a point. He has the least motivation and the most ambiguous presence in the Slenderverse because he's the monster that's used the most in the Slenderverse, and he's a physical embodiment of ambiguity. You can't give him much of a motivation beyond minor story reasoning and stuff like that. So in this series, where Stan is constantly going different places, supposedly throughout the Slenderverse, the Slenderman changes too. That's at least my excuse in production for why he's different sometimes. I mentioned this before, but the Slenderman is 100% digital in the first season. He was just based on 2 reference photos, and I would just add those photos into different places. And at one point he was actually drawn and added in, which... yeah. But after season 1, I actually secured my first payment from Google AdSense ever thanks to the series, so I used that money towards making a better, legit Slenderman. I purchased a mannequin, a female one, for 2 reasons. One, it was the only cheap mannequin I could find that stood straight with its arms at its sides, because apparently mannequins are super specific and expressive, and only the ones with like the certain like movable joints are like on the highly expensive side. And the other reason is because female mannequins are just made thinner, and which I figured would work better for Slenderman because, you know. So I went to work removing like the protrusions from the mannequin, you know, its eyes, nose, mouth, its chest, to get ready for the more difficult part, which was getting the face that I wanted for the character. Or lack of face, I guess. The first layer of the head was a white duct tape layer, just to cover up the holes that I made in the face. And then the second layer, in order to give the head like a much smoother look, was like plaster strips that I shaped the outside layer of the head with. So I would dip them in water and I would cover up the entire head with plaster strips to make it look a whole lot smoother. You can actually see that the plaster is starting to kind of weather and peel off a little bit. I guess as the thing has started to wear, it's the plaster's gotten dry and crackly and started to fall apart a little bit. So the whole face in general kind of ended up having this dent on the side of it, but in my opinion, it actually kind of adds to the uncanniness a little bit. Like, it makes it look a little freaky and uncanny and strange, and I don't know. That's what I think anyway. And then the arms of the Slenderman are just the mannequin arms that I detached from their sockets, and I kind of let hang down from the cuffs of the shirt, which I taped up with white and purple duct tape. I'm really pushing it, jeez. Nobody can even see the tape, it's concealed. I just knew that, now I just kind of shared that information, and now people can just know that. So in reality, there are no upper arms to the Slenderman. The arms that I took off of the sides just hang down from the sleeves, and if you pinch the sleeves, there's no arm there. Like, the Slenderman just has these flimsy arms, but since he just stands there, it's visually looks like he just has longer arms. Also, the forearms are covered in black socks. That's what those are. Physically, I would set up Slenderman in like a bunch of different ways, and every time it really meant something to me. You know, sometimes I would just set him up on the ground, and he isn't very tall, he's about my height. And the reason why I would set him up on the ground is because I wanted him to be my height. I wanted Slenderman's height to matter to the events of the story and where Stan's mind was at any point during the telling of the story. If you look throughout season 2 at Slenderman's height in relation to Stan, you can probably infer a lot from that. I would just prop him up on chairs if he needed to be taller, and then I would just stick something in front of the chair so that he looked tall and you couldn't see the bottom of his legs, and it gave you kind of like this illusion that he was standing kind of tall. Or if he was closer, like towards the end of the season, I would just carefully move the camera to conceal his feet, which worked even better if it was a scene that I shot in the dark or whatever. Overall, I really dig how I used Slenderman this season. You know, he's closer to a character in the story than I think I've ever seen him, at least in my series. I'm glad I got a good use for Slenderman. You know, he's always been the monster I wanted to make the most purposeful, and I think I finally figured out how to do him come season 2, which is so great. Okay, look, I'm gonna need the silence to stop really soon, okay? I came here for information about
I see him every night.
So, the Rake this season was actually not played by me, which is a huge deal. I always played the Rake physically by getting into a white morph suit. I think I got into the suit once or twice for season 2 just to, like, take a picture, but the majority of the Rake's presence in the season was not visual. You know, it was either audio... or it was like discussion based, you know, in an episode where he's mentioned but doesn't really appear. He appears physically twice in the entire season, and both times he's played by Robert Pye, who actually plays Oscar in season 2. It's still the same suit. It's still a white morph suit. I haven't really changed much huge stuff about the Rake physically, how I did it this season, you know. I did forget to do the black eyes this time, which I would normally just stick 2 black pieces of construction paper that are circular onto my face to give it the whole, like, void-eyed look, I guess. But I substituted that in his first appearance in season 2 with the pinhole eye look, which I actually did like a frame by frame thing with, where I tracked a little white solid onto his eyes to make it look like his eyes had like these 2 little pupils. And in his second appearance, I just used like the shadows and stuff to kind of, you know, I bumped up the RGB curves and all that to kind of give him this kind of ominous, freaky look where you can't really see much of his facial features at all. In terms of the actual story stuff for the Rake, despite him showing up in the flesh twice this season, he is, I think, the most prominent monster since, you know, he has the most plot relevance to the season. You know, he's working with Conor and he's throwing prophecies around. He has an entire episode, more or less, dedicated to him and his potential motivations in the series. So while the Slenderman is more thematic, the Rake is more like base narrative. And he fits the most snugly into the story, I think, you know, where his character is much less of an interpretive being and more of like a tangible force. What? The Seed Eater came about how a lot of things come about in writing Stan Frederick. You know, once upon a time, I had ideas for spin-off Slenderman series featuring all sorts of different things that I later abandoned and eventually reworked into Stan Frederick. Dark Days, which was the only one of these spin-off ideas I actually tried and failed to physically make a spin-off, had the Seed Eater as like a central monster. I knew I wanted to use that monster, like really badly. It's something I always wanted to do. Because, you know, its lore and its ideas are so young and underdeveloped, I knew I could do a lot with it. And since it's been done so few times before, I could possibly even set a standard for it, which would be an amazing, like, extra thing. So, how did I do it? Well, I made the mask from scratch. It's a large piece of cut-together cardboard, which I shaped and trimmed to be the shape I wanted. I dipped an old white t-shirt in coffee, attempting to make it look old. I ripped it up into pieces, and I kind of attached it to the mask in like these different pieces just so it looked kind of patchworky, because that's what the mask is kind of supposed to look like, I guess. I used staples for the mask, so that's super dangerous. I physically played the Seed Eater in its only episode of the season, with my friend Elijah standing in for me whenever I was on camera. I put on a black morph suit, and I bought 2 cheap wigs, one short and one really long one to simulate the hair on the Seed Eater's back. Keeping that suit together was hell. It was the worst thing ever. The mask was super delicate and the wigs kept falling off. It was a lot. It was a lot to like manage and take care of. I think it ended up looking really neat. I added the tongue through digital effects and stuff, and the sound design, which I had never really considered would be such a fun process for a monster before this. It was a lot of fun. I got to mix and match like different bird sounds, you know, at different speeds. I guess I just felt like the Seed Eater should sound like it had just different kinds of distorted bird calls, not just from one kind of bird, but like all kinds, because it's such a strange creature, and I felt like giving it this kind of cute sound would kind of offset it and make it seem a little bit more uncanny and weird, and I think I hit that mark. The Seed Eater appears in one episode in the whole season because it is not a central monster. It is another thematic character monster like the Slenderman is. But like the Rake, it does have an episode that talks heavily about it, even though it doesn't physically show up there. I don't know, I like this monster a lot. I'm glad I got to inject it with my vision for it and my interpretation. It's, I think, the more important thematic monster of the two. You know, Slenderman's very important to the story because Slenderman, well, he's been around forever, and he told us a lot about Stan as a character last season. But based on the stuff that we learned about Stan this season, the Seed Eater definitely tells us a lot more. Okay, so finally there's Conor, which a lot of the fans refer to as Lines, which I think is a cool nickname for him. I never explained in explicit detail how Conor was done, but honestly it was more of a happy accident when I first came up with him than you'd think. I shot a video of myself in front of a white background wearing the Conor outfit, and since I was wearing all black, it was easy to key it out. I added grain to the video. I made the grain super intense and each grain size like pretty big, and then I just dropped the saturation completely down to nothing so that the only grain colors were white and black, and then I keyed out the white, so all that was left were like these little black grains with like little spaces in between them, and then I just threw a directional blur After Effects preset on it to turn all of the remaining black dots into like straight lines, and the grain would just do its own thing and, you know, move by themselves, and it would give the lines a really cool kind of flowy motion to it, which I always thought was really cool. I always thought it was super freaky, and it ended up looking really weird. From there, I would just track Conor into any scene that I was filming, you know, with the full body, and find a place for him, and it would usually work out pretty well. Story-wise, Conor has always been a strain for me because I don't love black and white villains, and Conor cannot be anything except a black and white villain. I reserve the position of like a gray villain or an anti-hero, however you want to call it. I reserve that to Stan because of his past, so Conor was always going to be this evil force, you know, something worse that Stan had to rise up and fight. And as a result of this, I would say he's more of a thematic monster than a physical one, though I will say that he does have a little bit more of a narrative push than the other two thematic monsters of Slenderman and the Seed Eater, because he's working with the Rake to hurt Stan and all that. While, you know, Slenderman and the Seed Eater are more along for the ride thematically here. I do love each and every one of these monsters. I really do. I think that there's a really potent power in prescribing ideas to supernatural things in horror stories and not just making them scary antagonists. You know, making an exciting horror story is fun, but I personally prefer to take what we're familiar with and attach ideas to them of things like inescapable trauma, or personal responsibility, or sins of the past, or, you know, fate. There's something really scary about all of those things alone, and I've attempted to attach them to murder monsters that liquefy your brain and physically attack you at any opportunity anyway. It's the insult to injury. I think that's a great way to describe the monsters. The monsters are actually the insult, they're not the injury. I stopped being scared of him years ago. You know why? Because he's just a monster. Please.